All right, so I want to start with just a little bit of a kind of a background before we get into the nitty-gritties. This is going to be a very kind of practical lesson today. Like, my goal when you leave here today is that you can take something you've learned and immediately implement it into your classroom. But before we do that, we kind of need to set a foundation. So the reason why we serve in our churches is because we want to reach people, right? That's the whole point, is that we want to reach people. And so what does the Bible say about reaching people? And I'm just going to read a couple of verses, not because I'm preaching, but just because everything we do comes from the Word of God. So in Matthew chapter 19, verse 14, it says, "But Jesus said, Suffer the little children and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And what I love about this verse is there's no caveats. It doesn't say, suffer the neurotypical children to come unto me. It doesn't say, suffer the children that are well behaved to come unto me. It says, suffer the little children to come unto me. All children. God has a heart. Jesus had a heart for all children. And then in John 3, verse 14, Jesus says, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And if Jesus is lifted up, the Bible says that he will draw all men unto him. So we see that God's heart is for children to be drawn to him and for adults to be drawn to him. So that covers everybody, right? And that means special needs children, and that means special needs adults. And so if we have been put in a position in the church where we are ministering to the children or the adults that are in our ministry, that encompasses all people, special needs or not. And so if that's the case, then we need to be prepared to minister to all people, not just the people that we feel comfortable with or not just the people that we understand, but with all people. And so the last verse I want to read before we get into this is in Luke chapter 14. Had my ribbon in there and it fell out. So that's what I get. I'm doing a lesson on being prepared and then I'm not prepared. Luke chapter 14, verse 28, it says, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest happily, after he laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish." And the premise of this passage is that we're supposed to count the cost. When we follow Christ, we have to be prepared to give all. But you can also look at this as being prepared to give all. And so our lesson today really is how to be prepared to serve the people that God has brought into our ministry. And if we are prepared, we're going to be setting ourselves up for success. Our son AJ has autism. He also has ADHD, and he has an intellectual disability. And so because of those things, there are certain things as parents that we have to do to have a successful day. Ashley's here. She's on AJ's ABA therapy team. She's his BCBA, which we'll explain a little bit later. But she has helped us learn some tools to help us be successful when we go out into the community. And a perfect example of this was when we went on vacation in this last January. We were going to a theme park, and theme parks can be a little overwhelming. They're loud, there's lots of people, it's unpredictable, it's all those trigger things, right, that our special kids have trouble with. So we had gone on activities like this before, and it had been terrible because Mom wasn't prepared. I didn't have the proper comfort things. I didn't have his headphones. I didn't have fidget toys. I didn't give him the breaks that he needed. But in January, we set up for success, and we watched videos, and we took things, and we had his comforts, and it was the best experience. I was texting her our whole vacation, like, look at what our son is doing. This is so incredible. But that was only possible because we prepared. And the same is going to be true in your classrooms. You can have a successful classroom if you're prepared. And the funny thing is, as teachers, we know that when it comes to our neurotypical kids, right? We prepare for them. But with our special needs kids, we need to be even more prepared. We cannot just wing it. We can't just fly by the seat of our pants. We have got to be prepared. And we're going to look today at 4 different areas that we can work on to be prepared to minister to our special needs kids. So, we're going to cover 4 different thoughts. We're going to consider our audience, consider our space, consider our budget, and consider Christ. And I'm going to go into these into a little bit more detail. So first off, we need to consider our audience. What ages are you dealing with? You could be dealing with adults with special needs, or you could be dealing with children with special needs. It's pretty basic, right? Now, some of these groups, adults and kids with special needs, they'll have some needs that overlap, right? It's not going to change from an adult to a child. You have an adult in a wheelchair, they're going to have similar needs to a kid that's in a wheelchair, okay? But there are going to be some things that are very different between these 2 age groups. And so it's important for you to know your audience. Are you working with adults or are you working with children? That's really important. And then we need to consider what are the special needs in your class? And this is where we're probably going to spend a decent amount of our time. And I want to just start by saying, I'm going to put a bunch of things up on the screen here, but this is not a complete list. There is no way in a setting like this I could cover every single special need that you're going to come across. This is just probably some of the highlights, right? The main things that you might come across in your classrooms. So, we might be dealing with people, with students with physical disabilities. And this one is probably the most obvious, and it's the most understood, okay? Most of us have come in contact with somebody with a physical disability, and it's something we're familiar with. So what might some of those be? We could have a deaf student. We could have a blind student. We may have a student that has a speech impediment or a speech delay or no speech at all. And we could have a student with mobility issues. Now, mobility issues could be something as far as being completely wheelchair bound, or it could be someone that has leg braces. It could be someone that uses a walker. And interestingly enough, someone who has mobility issues may also require a service dog. So that's just something to think of. My son has a friend in his class, in his school, who has spina bifida, and she has a service dog to help balance her when she walks. And so you have to know that, right? If you have a student in your class that has a service dog, you need to understand that and plan for that and know how you're going to handle that in your classroom. Now these, like I said before, these are the most obvious, and I think all of us would have come in contact with some person, maybe not in our church, but in our life, that has one of these disabilities. But let's talk about some more disabilities that are maybe not so well known. So we have cognitive disability. Cognitive disability is anything that affects the way a person thinks, processes information. You do have a handout that has kind of like a glossary of terms. So if there's any terms we cover that you don't understand, it's very possible that I put the definition in that glossary already. So what are some cognitive needs that your children might have? You might have a child with an intellectual delay. Our son has an intellectual delay, and that basically means that he doesn't necessarily function at the same level as his peers. So he's 11, but in a lot of ways functions at a 5 or 6 year old level, in some ways as an 11-year-old. So it's important that you understand the child in your class and kind of figure out where they're processing from and help them. Obviously, if you have a child, if you're teaching, 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, and you have a child in there who is functioning as a 5-year-old, you're not going to give them the same work or the same expectations as you would your other kids, right? Then there's also sensory processing disorder. Now, I'm not going to get into this because we're going to talk about it with our expert. But sensory processing disorder is probably one of the most under or misunderstood disabilities that you're going to deal with in your class. Probably most of you have a kid in your class that has some form of sensory processing disorder, and you maybe don't even know it. And so it's a really important one, and it's one that I had no clue about until I had a son with SPD. So we're going to talk about that. You may have a child that has memory difficulty. Again, our son struggles with recall. He'll tell you something that happened 5 minutes ago, but you ask him something that happened last week, he's not going to remember. So if you have a child like that in your class, your expectations are going to be different, right? If just because they could say the memory verse last week doesn't mean they're going to be able to say it this week. And so you need to know that and prepare for that and plan for that. All right. And then we have inattention. Now, inattention and in behavioral, we're going to look at hyperactivity. Inattention and hyperactivity are, again, another two of the most misunderstood special needs situations that you're going to come across. And really that's because a lot of times we are very quick to prejudge our kids. Well, they're not paying attention because they're naughty. Or they're not paying attention. They just need to learn. They need to learn to sit still. Or they need to learn to pay attention. When I'm talking, they should listen, And the funny thing is, like, we have all these high expectations for kids in our class that we don't even put on ourselves. I guarantee you throughout this 45-minute discussion, there will be times when your attention will wane from what we're talking about, right? And we give ourselves grace, but we won't give our kids grace. And even more so when you have a child that deals with inattention as part of their actual makeup. They cannot help it. Now, it doesn't mean they can't work on it, and it doesn't mean there's not strategies that we can use to help them, but we have to be careful that we don't automatically assume that inattention is bad behavior. And so you need to really consider that with the kids in your class and ask the Lord for wisdom. Like this child, you may not know their diagnosis. The parents may not know their diagnosis yet. But if you have a child that's maybe really struggling to pay attention, ask the Lord to help you. Ask the Lord to give you wisdom and patience and grace with that child. And instead of just kind of laying the hammer down, work with them and use some of the tools that we're going to talk about today and see if it helps in your class. And then the last one in this section is speech. And yes, I did put speech twice, and no, it was not a mistake. Sometimes speech can be a physical need, and sometimes speech will be a cognitive need. What do I mean by that? So sometimes you might have a child that has a cleft palate, a cleft lip. That's going to affect their speech. That's something physical that's happened to them, right? But then sometimes speech is a cognitive issue in the sense that what a child is processing in their mind is not able to come out of their mouth. And so it could be that they cannot speak at all, or it could be that they script like our son does. He does a lot of scripting. Sorry, I keep hitting that. Or it could be that they're a very early speaker. They could be 11 and have the vocabulary of a 4-year-old, 3-year-old. And so, but sometimes that's more of a cognitive issue. It's a processing issue between their brain and their mouth. And there's very specific diagnosis, apraxia. Phew, my brain went blank for half a second. And I actually don't think I have that in your pamphlet. I may have, but apraxia will affect a child's ability to eat, to chew, to swallow. They have very low muscle tone in their mouth, so forming words can be difficult. It can be tiring. And so if you have a child in your class that doesn't want to talk, it doesn't always necessarily mean they're shy. They maybe are just having trouble processing information from their brain to their mouth. So it's important. I think it was Anna I was talking to yesterday, that sometimes as teachers we can be impatient. And if you have a child that has any sort of processing disability, you have to be patient. Give them time to answer you. Don't be in such a hurry to get through your lesson. Give them the chance. With AJ, sometimes I'll have to ask him a question, and then I'll have to just wait. And sometimes it will take a minute or so, but I'll see him. He's like, the wheels are turning, and then he'll answer me. Sometimes he's not paying attention, so I have to get his attention and ask him again. And so it takes wisdom to know how this applies to your class. But just be aware that these are some of the special needs that you might be dealing with. All right, then we have behavioral. This one's my favorite. Behavioral. What are some of the behavioral issues you might deal with in your class? You might have hyperactivity. And my husband joked about this yesterday. If you have a child that has ADHD, Spanking them is not going to fix them. Putting them in timeout is not going to fix them. I've seen so many memes going around the internet that kind of hint to this idea that a child with ADHD just needs a good spank on the bottom, and it's like, that's so outdated information anyway. But it's especially harmful when you're dealing with a child that has hyperactivity. So remember, when we're talking about these issues, these are things, this is not something that is in your child, your student's control, okay? This is part of their makeup. This is how God has created them. And so if you have a child that's dealing with a diagnosis of ADHD, ADD, they're the same thing, you are going to notice some hyperactivity in your classroom. It is not going to help your student, if they are hyperactive, to force them to sit in a chair. You are damaging your relationship with the child, and you are preventing the child from actually learning anything because they're not able to learn while they're being forced to sit still if they're in a period of hyperactivity. So we're going to give you some tools later on how you can help a child in your classroom that deals with hyperactivity. But again, it's a big one that a lot of times we overlook as teachers, and we just kind of chalk it up to, that kid has a lot of energy. Oh my goodness, I wish I had his energy. And instead of looking at it as, when our son has a period of hyperactivity, it's not fun for him, right? It's not like, and he's not doing it to be naughty. He's actually doing it to tell us, I need something. So I need help. And because he has a speech disorder, he's not able to necessarily tell me why he needs help. So it's important to kind of put all these things together in your mind and try to have a plan on how you're going to help these children. And like I said before, if you have a child with hyperactivity in your class, the time to figure out how you're going to help that child is not when you walk into your Sunday school or junior church room. That's too late. The time to plan how you're going to help a child with hyperactivity is during the week. When you're praying over your lessons, which we should be doing anyway, when you're working over your lesson, and to spend specific time asking the Lord to show you, how can I help Johnny? He needs help. We don't have any Johnnies here, right? Johnny's a pretty generic name. But it's important to spend that time. And I will tell you from personal experience, not just with our son, but with other special needs kids we've had in our church, the blessing that you will receive from spending that time and the relationship that you will build with that child is precious, and it's worth it, and it's biblical. So take that time to figure out a plan on how you're going to help that child. Excuse me. Okay, the next one is emotional dysregulation. And I did write down the definition for this one in your book, but just very briefly, and I'm not a big expert on emotional dysregulation. AJ does deal with, I think it's kind of tied up with autism, ADHD, but basically emotional dysregulation would tie into, you maybe heard the term, a meltdown. A meltdown is not the same as a temper tantrum, okay? If you have a child, maybe my daughter Peyton, she's in here? Yep. No, she's not. So if she's under the table. My neurotypical child is under the table. So if I was at the store with Peyton, right, and she wanted a toy, and I said, no, I'm not buying you a toy today, and she went, okay, that's naughty, right? She's being naughty. She knows she doesn't get whatever she wants all the time. She understands. Just because she asks something doesn't mean she's going to get it. Or maybe I tell her it's time to go clean up your room, and she's like, I don't want to. And she never does that, do you, baby girl? And she like storms off and slams the door. Okay, that's bad behavior, and we understand that. But a meltdown is completely different, and an emotional dysregulation is not the same. So emotional dysregulation might be, for example, AJ this morning. We asked him if he wanted to come out here. And this is very different for him. He doesn't usually see his church set up this way. He doesn't usually see you in his church. So he came out here and he was like, ah! And he starts yelling and screaming and ran to the back and shut the door. He's trying to process his emotion. Like, how does he feel about this? This is scary. Or this is Maybe it's exciting, but he doesn't know how to process excitement. Maybe he's happy you're here. I don't know. Emotional dysregulation could be if you are trying to change from one activity to another in your class. So let's say you're going from story time to, well, let's do a different one. Say you're going from, maybe you have your kids playing with some toys when they first come into your class, or coloring, or we'd say a preferred activity, right? Something that they want to do that's fun. And then you say, okay, it's time to come to lesson time, and the kids don't want to give up their toys, right? You don't want to stop reading your book to go do laundry, right? So you're saying, put away these fun things that you're doing and come sit in this chair and listen to me talk. And they need to do that. But sometimes that transition can be enough to send them into a little bit of a spiral, and they don't know how to regulate that emotion. So it's not that they don't like you. It's not that they don't want to listen to your Bible story. They maybe just need a little bit of help, a little bit of time to make that transition. And we're going to give you some tools to help you with that later too. All right, meltdowns, we pretty much just covered those with dysregulation. And then aggression. Now, aggression can present itself as self-harm, and it can also present itself as aggression towards another person. Now, I want to be clear about this. Nowhere in our books and nowhere in any of the sessions that we give will you hear my husband and I say that as a teacher, if you have a child lashing out at you or another student, that it's okay and you're just to let it happen. It's not okay. All right? You don't have to be in a situation where you're being punched and kicked and hit and spat on and all of that, okay? But I think understanding the reason why your student might be having aggression will help you in how you handle that aggression. And a lot of times, and Ashley, you can help me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of times, if you do the tips and tricks that we're going to show you today, you'll 90% of the time head off aggression before it even starts. A lot of time, aggression is going to present itself in your classroom because you are not taking the steps that are needed to help the child. Aggression tends to be the mountain peak of all of these other things. And so I know personally for myself, when my son starts having aggressive behavior, I've already lost. I should have made changes way earlier. And so I'm not saying blame yourself, because you can't necessarily control your students' emotions. But if you're seeing weekly aggression, it's possible that you maybe need to make some changes to your environment, to how you're presenting information, to the transitions in your classroom. But aggression is solvable. It can be handled. It can be dealt with. If you have a child that is having aggression towards themselves, sometimes you'll see children pick or bite themselves, bang their heads against the wall. Self-harming, self-aggression. That's a big cry. That's they need something. So if you're seeing a child with a lot of self-aggression, maybe look and say, okay, is this happening? You know, we're big data takers. Is this happening at the same time every week? So is this student biting himself every week when we go from song time to memory verse time? Okay, well, if it's every week at that same time, then you know there's some kind of trigger there. There's something causing the child to not be able to control their emotions. And so what kind of changes can you make? Tweak something. Try something different. Don't be afraid to change how you do things to try and help that child. And it's not just helping that child, it's helping the rest of your class too, for sure. Okay, and then we have medical. And again, medical is probably similar to physical. It's one that we may have come in contact with in our day-to-day lives. And again, these are just, I only put down two because when you start listing medical conditions, it's never ending. But two of the most common ones when you're dealing with special needs children, two of the most common ones you might find are seizure activity and food allergies or intolerances. Now, I have two children that have seizure disorder. And it's important that you as the teacher know what that looks like, that you know it's important to record it. It's important to tell the parent. It's important that you know what to do. It's important that you know what the proper protocol is. And I can't tell you what that protocol is because for each student, it will be different. Their neurologist will have a plan in place for that student. So if you have a student that comes to your class and the parent says that they have epilepsy or some other form of seizure disorder, ask them if they have a neurological plan of action. And they should, because the school will request one also, and you can have that in your file. You should have a file for all. I think you should have a file for all your children, but you should definitely have a file for your special needs children. Put that in the file, and that way it's written down. So if you have a child that has a seizure, you know what to do, right? And you're prepared. And the reason why it's important to have it in a file is, what if you're sick one Sunday and someone has to cover your class? It's important that they have it right there at their fingertips. Because seizures can be a scary and a dangerous situation if you don't handle it properly. And then food allergies or intolerances. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but please, please, please take them seriously. Gluten is not a fad diet. A gluten allergy is not a fad. It's real. And a lot of times kids with autism and other special needs have gut issues. So if you have a parent that comes to you that says, my child is allergic to dairy or my child is allergic to gluten, please know what that means. Please don't think you know better. And I'm not trying to be mean or cruel. I'm speaking from love and from personal experience. But please know what that means and take the time to learn what that means if you offer a snack in your class. And if you offer a snack in your class, make sure it's safe. Peanut allergies are another big one. I know some churches that have to be peanut-free environment because they have children in there, or adults even in their ministry, that have such a severe peanut allergy that if there's any peanuts on the property, they can have anaphylactic shock. So please take it seriously. It's not some kind of, roll your eyes like, oh, you have gluten intolerance too, because we know but we know it kind of went through a fad where it was healthy and everybody stopped eating gluten. But it's not that if a parent comes to you and says, this is what my child needs, okay? All right. So before we move off of this, I just want to say one other thing. How many of you, and this, I'm being sarcastic, okay? How many of you, if you had a deaf student in your classroom, would refuse them an interpreter or tell them to turn off their cochlear implant? Anybody? Of course not, right? That's ridiculous, right? Isn't that horrible? How many of you, if you had a blind student, would tell them they could not bring their guide dog and they could not use their cane? Right? We wouldn't do that, right? What if you had a person who was in a wheelchair? Would you tell them they couldn't use their wheelchair and they had to get up and walk? It's ridiculous, right? But guys, so many times we do that with all these others. If you have a child that has sensory processing disorder, what they need in your classroom is just as important as that wheelchair, as that cane, and as that interpreter. It's not negotiable. And we have to get to the place in our churches where we understand that it is non-negotiable. And it is just as cruel to refuse a child fidget toys or some other kind of sensory manipulative. It's just as cruel to ignore a child that's suffering from emotional dysregulation as it is to tell a blind person, put your cane away, or you can't bring your dog in. And I know it maybe sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. They need it. It is essential to their success in your class, just as much as your children that have, or your adults that have a physical need. And so I just want to make that really clear, that these things they're not bunk. They're not a waste of time. It's not a fad. These children need these things to be successful in your classroom. Oh, yes, not a comprehensive list. We covered that. Okay, moving on. The rest of this is a lot more practical. So you're going to consider, well, hello. Oh, there you go. Consider your space. All of us have different churches, right? Miss Anna, they have a big property, a large church, lots of facilities. And those of us that come from a small church think we want what they have, but it comes with its own set of problems and its own set of issues, okay? So we all come from a different place in our ministries. We have different resources. We have different rooms available to us. So I want to kind of go through these things and talk about how we can use our space wisely, but understand that what I'm saying here is a general guide, okay? It's not, it might not work exactly the way I say it in your building. For example, I'm just going to pick on Anna today. Anna's church, one of their Sunday schools they have a Christian school, so one of their Sunday schools meet in the preschool classroom, okay? She cannot change the fact that it's a preschool classroom, okay? There's going to be desks in there. There's going to be school materials in there. They can't change that because that's the facility that they have and that's what they're using. So understand that I'm going to give you some suggestions, but you make them work for the facility that you have been given to work in, okay? So first thing, you want to consider the size of your room. Have you ever gone to decorate your house and realized that your vision is bigger than the space you have? Or you bought a rug and you put it in the house and it was like way too big. So we have to be careful that I'm going to give you so many ideas of things that you can do in your room, but you're not going to be able to do all of them, okay? You're going to take what works for the size of your room and make it work. Use the space you have wisely. Your classroom should not be a storage room. I thought that was funny. Could you imagine trying to teach AJ in a room like that? That would be a disaster. So try to keep your room clutter-free. Try to have it not, obviously we have to store things in our room, but try and do it in a way that it's not kind of laying out all over the place. Invest in purposeful storage to keep the room clutter-free. So if you have to keep, like in Anna's case, it's a preschool, try and find a way, work with the preschool teacher, try to find a way to keep the room to where everything that needs to be in the room can stay in the room, but that it's in a way that it keeps the room feeling cluttered, free, and spacious, okay? A lot of times you'll have kids that deal with emotional dysregulation. If you put them in a room that's got stuff everywhere, that's going to trigger them right away because they can't process. Here's an idea. Go vertically with storage to create more floor space. So if you have wall space, try to use that wall space. Put shelving up. Put things on a top shelf that are maybe seasonal. So if you have Christmas curriculum, put it up high somewhere. You're not going to need it all the time. Don't put the things you're going to use every week up high, but try to get things up off the floor. When you have special needs kids, you use a lot of floor space. So try to get things up off the floor. You can even, I don't have a picture of this, but you can even have desks. If you want to have a desk space in your room, you can have desks that attach to the wall that then are on a hinge that you can fold up and clip it. So you can unfold the desk, have the kids come work around the desk when you're doing your papers or your crafts or whatever, and then you flip it up and hook it, and the underside you can paint it with blackboard chalk. You can have it look like it's a blackboard, but then you don't have that table on your floor so that you can have more of the floor space because you're going to need to give your kids room for movement. Get creative. Who was I talked to somebody, I don't know if it was today or yesterday. Some of the best ideas you're going to get for your Sunday school and junior church classrooms is by following special needs teachers on social media. So if you're on Instagram or Facebook, find a special needs page that has like a teacher or a therapist or something. They will give you some of the best ideas because this is their job, right? They do it every day. And they'll give you some great ideas to use in your classroom. So read teacher blogs, get ideas from Pinterest, follow special needs teachers. I think I just said that on social media. Okay. So we're going to consider our space, the size of our room, the safety of our location. There we go. Safety first. When you have a child especially with autism, and I'm not sure, I've never worked with a child with Down syndrome. Did your daughter ever have elopement? Did your daughter ever deal with like running away, eloping? No. It's a big safety risk when you have a child with autism. Kids with autism like to run. So if you're in a situation like this, our building is on a very busy street. We have to be very careful with our building because AJ will just take off. He'll just run. He doesn't understand danger. He doesn't understand keeping himself safe. It's something we work on all the time, but you have to be aware as a teacher, if you have a child, especially with autism, if you have a child with autism in your classroom, to be aware of that and to make sure that your environment is safe. But this also goes if you were to have a child who was blind or in a wheelchair or with crutches. You need to make sure that there's not fall hazards and things like that in your classroom too. So here's some ideas. Can you install a gate in your classroom? Can you put a gate over the door so that when you're in class, AJ can open gates, but it slows him down at least. So ask your pastor. If you have a child that's an eloper that's constantly running out of your classroom, ask your pastor, hey, could we put a gate up to help? And I will tell you, if you do that, those special needs parents will be your best friends because you took that time to realize that that was a need for their child. Can you put a motion alarm on doors? So this one would more apply if you were in a basement. If your children's church is in a basement of a church that has an exterior door, and if you have a larger ministry with lots of kids, you're not necessarily going to have your eye on every kid all the time. There are motion sensor alarms that just work by a magnet that you could put on an exterior door that if the child was to break through the door, it would send an alarm off and you would automatically know the child was escaping. Okay, so these are easy fixes, right? These are easy things to do. And then our favorite, and I didn't bring any, I was supposed to bring them to show, but you can do red, green, and yellow thumbs on your doors. Okay, so I'm going to explain this. This door right here leads to a storage closet, and then right next to the storage closet, there's a door that goes outside. And it's perfect because nobody watches this door. So AJ knows if he wants to get out, he can slip out here and he's out and he's who knows where. So I came to Ashley and I was like, we got to do something because, as much as we keep an eye on him, he needs to be visually reminded that this is a door he's not allowed to use. So Ashley made us some red, green, and yellow thumbs. And so the red thumb is a thumbs down, the green thumb is a thumb up, and the yellow thumb looks like this. And it means you have to knock and wait. Because my son doesn't understand privacy, and if you go into the bathroom and don't lock the door, or even if you do lock the door, he can unlock the door, and he's going to walk in on you in the bathroom. And again, let me clarify. That does not mean that I'm saying that behavior is acceptable, okay? We work with him on learning that you don't do that. But what can you do in your environment to help? So on this door, we put a red thumbs down. And the cool thing now is we've done it for so long, I don't need to have them up anymore. I just tell him that's a red door, and he knows, oh, yeah, I'm not allowed to go out there. And the visual reminder is very, very helpful. So we would have green thumbs on doors that he could go in and out of whenever he wanted, and we would have yellow thumbs on the doors that were like bathrooms that he was supposed to knock and wait. And we use these around our home, too, to help him remember what he's supposed to do with each door. And it's just we'll talk about this in our session, but a visual is so important for some of these special needs kiddos. So we'll get into the whys on that later. All right, so we've done safety, and then sensory. Doesn't that look like a nice room? I would love that room if I was a teacher. The sensory input of the surroundings. So what does this mean? Come on. There we go. Give your students room and opportunity to move. It is not feasible to have, I think, any child, but especially a child with special needs, to sit in your class from the minute they get there to the minute they leave. Even in a school setting, school teachers are learning that that's not healthy. It's not a good environment for kids. But when you have these special needs kids, sometimes they need movement for their brains to engage. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. So make sure in your classroom, however you can, give your students room and opportunity to move. Now, if you have a bigger room, you might be able to put a little sensory corner with some bean bags and a mat and stuff so that if your child is having a difficult time, they can go into that little soft space and recuperate for a minute and then come back with the rest of the kids. But if you don't, there's tricks that you can use. We don't have a huge junior church room, and there's tricks that we can use in our room too. Keep decor minimal. It should have a purpose. Again, this kind of goes back to your classroom being too cluttered. If you have stuff on every inch of your wall, that is visually overstimulating for kids with special needs. So keep your decor minimal. It should have a purpose. So have visual schedules up, and we're going to talk about that later. But you can make visual schedules really cute and add to the decor of your room, but it's functional, okay? Your lesson visuals are great to put up on your wall. Keeps that constant reminder, but I would change it every week. Don't put like 5 weeks worth up on your wall. It's too much visual stimulation. Have a visual of your rules up on your wall. And when I say a visual of the rules, I don't just mean words. I mean visuals, okay? And we'll show you what that means later. And then a visual reward system. By the time you put all of these things up on your wall, your wall's going to be pretty full, and you probably don't need to be putting a bunch of other stuff. Now, if you want to do like seasonal stuff up on your walls, we all like to do that, right? Christmas time, fall time, whatever. But just when you're doing it, be thoughtful of the children that you have and ask yourself, is this going to adversely affect? Is this going to make Johnny unsuccessful in my classroom? And be really thinking about that when you're setting up your room. Okay. Have an array of sensory items in your classroom. And we're going to have fun playing with some of these later. But here's just a suggestion of some sensory items that work well in a classroom. You can have glitter sensor bottles, poppets, and that's another one that's kind of a fad thing right now. All kids like poppets, but for your special needs kids, they serve a purpose. Clickers or squishies, and fidget spinners, and a whole bunch more. And we're going to pass around a box of them later. Sometimes I feel like teachers are maybe put off by some of these sensory items because some of them are noisy. I'm going to show you some examples later of bad ones to have in your classroom, because you don't want one that like squeaks and squeals and all of this when you're trying to teach a lesson, right? But there's ways to incorporate these sensory items into your classroom where they're not disruptive, but they're going to help the child that needs them. And then just a couple more things to think about in this section. Turn the volume level of your music down. Or obviously if you have a class that has 30 kids in it, it's going to be loud, right? You can't help that. But maybe ask the parent of your child if they would benefit from wearing headphones in your classroom. And don't be resistant to that. It's a need. Sometimes for AJ, sound physically hurts him if it's too loud. And so if we're going somewhere that's very loud, we bring headphones for him. That's one of the things we did at the amusement park. He walked around all day with his headphones on, and it muffles out some of the exterior noises, and it helps them to not feel so overstimulated. The temperature of the room can be important. We have a little boy in our junior church who his parents were pretty sure that he has ADHD, and he is hot all the time because his body never stops. And the interesting thing about hyperactivity is it's not just the movement of the external body. Their whole body, his head, his brain, everything inside of him is moving at a fast pace. So he's really, really hot. Well, I'm not going to freeze out all my other kids, right? Because he's hot. So what we do is we have a little fan for him that he can go and use when he gets really hot. I also have, these are really cool. They're called cooling blankets. And they're kind of like, almost like microfiber material. You wet them in water, wring them out, and it's not drippy, but it's cool. And he'll wear that around his neck, and it helps cool him. And when he feels cooler, he feels calmer. And then the brightness of lights in your room sometimes can be overstimulating. So, and again, this may not affect every one of your classrooms, and it may change from year to year depending on who you have in your classroom, but it's just things to be aware of. All right, not lastly, we better move quick. All right, consider your budget. This is pretty self-explanatory. So if you know that you want to make some changes into your classroom, make a list. Make a list of all the things that you would like to do, right? And then you got to find your funding. So obviously ask your pastor, do we have a budget if we want to make some changes in the classroom? Don't assume that you have to do this out of your own pocket. Sometimes teachers will do that. Go talk to your pastor first. It's very sweet and generous that you would want to do it out of your own pocket. But go talk to your pastor and see if there's room in the children's budget to take some money and to put some of these things in your classroom. You can also maybe take a special offering in your class. Again, check with pastor first because he knows what's coming up and what other special offerings they might be asking for. But take a special offering up so that you can get some things for your classroom. Seek out donations. There's all kinds of places where you could go to get donations and things for your classroom. There's multiple places on social media where you could get things for free. I know in New England we have the Buy Nothing pages on Facebook. They're a great place to go and look for things that people are literally giving away, and you might be able to use that in your classroom. Ask your special needs families if they have anything extra. Sometimes we're given a bunch of stuff, and sometimes my son's school, they'll have extras given to them, and they'll, ask, hey, do you want it? And so sometimes we have extra things lying around, and we'd be happy to donate to our classrooms. Make an Amazon wish list, and then make it available to the other people in your church. And maybe they'll want to be a blessing, and they can buy some things off your Amazon wish list. And then visuals can be made for free or very cheap. The most important thing you need about visuals is a laminator. If you have a laminator, you can pretty much make any visual for pennies on the dollar. So it doesn't have to be expensive. And then purchase items of most importance first. And I would personally say safety is first. So if you have safety issues in your classroom, address those first. They're the most important because a family is not going to bring their child back to your class if they don't feel like their child is safe, okay? So safety is most important. Work on those things first and then work on the other things later. And you don't need every fancy gadget that's out there, okay? There's a lot of commercialism when it comes to special needs and you need this and this and this. You don't need every fancy gizmo and gadget, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. All right, and then lastly and most importantly, consider Christ. We talked about this last night a lot, but the reason why these sweet little ones are being brought to your classroom is so that you can teach them about Jesus. He is the most important thing that you need to get across in your classroom. And last night we said, sometimes we have to be careful as teachers that we don't look at the special need of the child and say, well, they'll never understand the gospel, so it's okay. As long as they're safe and happy and quiet, it's okay. You don't know that. You don't know. I don't know. My son right now doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. He generically knows God and that he's in heaven, but he doesn't understand real biblical truth. He doesn't understand he's a sinner. He doesn't understand that he needs a savior, but that doesn't mean that he won't one day, right? Why do we sing Christian songs to babies in the nursery? They don't understand about Jesus yet, but we think that we want them to, right? So when we have our special needs kids, you may have a fourth grader who you think isn't understanding anything that you're going over in your lesson. But it's okay. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to teach it anyway, because one day that child's understanding might develop to the point where they will understand about Jesus. And on top of that, they need to know Jesus loves them. They need to know that God made them, that they're special to Jesus, that they're important to Jesus. And so it's important that we do that. So, number one, or letter A, how can I show Christ's love to my students? First and foremost, more important than lesson plans, more important than cool crafts, more important than singing in front of the church, more important than any of the other fun things that we do with our kids. The most important thing is, how can I show this child God's love? And that may take some creativity on your part, depending on the needs of the child. And then how can I share salvation with my student? We have a really cool visual to show you later on a cool way to introduce salvation to some of your kids that maybe have difficulty understanding some of the concepts. So how can I share salvation with my students? And then third, and I love this one, how can I help my students love coming to God's house? Isn't that important? Isn't it important that our kids love coming to church? And so imagine your worst case scenario, right? Imagine your worst nightmare. Like, you remember that? I don't think they show it anymore, but there was a TV show called Fear Factor. Do you know anyone know what I'm talking about? And they would like take your worst fear and make you do it, right? Like maybe you were terrified of cockroaches and they would make you sit in a tub full of cockroaches, right? Nobody wants to put themselves in that kind of situation. Well, I guess they did for money, but generally speaking, we don't want to put ourselves in that situation, and we would avoid it at all costs. So now imagine your special needs child, and imagine your classroom feels that way to them. They're not going to want to come to church, and they're not going to love coming to church, and then that's going to make it harder for mom and dad to come to church, right? And mom and dad need church. I'll tell you, guys, special needs families need church. We need it. We all need church. But when you are dealing with something in your family like a special needs child, the amount of depletion that you feel just on a day-to-day basis, I don't want to get emotional, but I'm looking at special needs parents in this room. It's not an easy life to live. It's a blessed life to live. And I'm thankful for my son, but it's not an easy life to live. And those moms and dads need you to do your best for their child so that they have the freedom and the ability to come into God's house and not worry about their little one, and not worry if they're being accepted or if they're being loved on or if their needs are being met, so that they can come in and they can serve and they can be under the preaching and they can have a little part of their life that's not controlled by special needs. That is the importance of your job. It's that important. It's we always say nursery workers are just so amazing, right? Because they take all the screaming, crying babies and they take care of them. That's how special needs junior church and Sunday school teachers are. They are a literal lifeline to parents whose marriages are maybe on the brink of divorce, whose financial burden, because I'll tell you, this stuff is not cheap. Having a special needs child is expensive, and insurance does not cover everything. And the therapies that you might try and all of the things, it can be an expensive endeavor. And sometimes these moms and dads are coming to church and they are literally hanging on by a thread every single day. And just the fact that you took some extra time and extra love to make your classroom a place where their child feels welcome and accepted and safe can go so far in making their church experience something that they look forward to as a family, something that we maybe take for granted. I was talking to a special needs mom not that long ago who said, I literally dreaded going to church every Sunday. That just broke my heart. Nobody should dread coming to the one place that God gives us to be a place of solace, a place of refreshment and encouragement. And this mom looked at me and said, I dreaded going to church every Sunday because nobody understood my child. And that it ripped my heart out. And so if I can leave you with anything this weekend, it's just love on those babies, love on those kids. If you work with special needs adults, love on them. They have a hard time trying to adjust in society. And when you have a child who 7, 4, 8, 9, 11, people can overlook some stuff because they're like, AJ's so cute, and people will be like, oh my goodness, he's so cute. He can be doing the most weird, annoying thing, but he's so cute. You put that in a 22-year-old body, you put that in a 30-year-old body, it's not cute. And people are repelled by it. People are turned away by it. And we need to embrace those ones. We need to show them the love of Christ. Christ didn't turn away. Christ didn't turn away from the leprous people or the people that couldn't walk or the people that society outcasted. Christ didn't turn away from them. And those adults in your church that have special needs, they need you. They need you to be their friend. They need you to be a companion. Learn about them. Learn about what interests them. Talk to them about what interests them, even if it doesn't interest you. and make them a part of your church family. And I will tell you, you will receive a blessing. You will receive a blessing. You can ask any of our church members how much they love AJ, and they will tell you. He is so loved and accepted in this church. And that's not because of my husband and I. That's because of them. They're sweet people. They love the Lord, and they take such good care of our son. My last son I'm going to leave you with, and my husband will be proud because I'm just on time. Special needs ministry is not babysitting. It is discipleship. It's don't look at your special needs kids as long as they're sitting in the corner, they're quiet, they're not being disruptive, and they're not hurting anybody, that you've done your job. You haven't done your job. Your job as a Sunday school teacher and a junior church worker is to disciple them, is to teach them about the Lord Jesus Christ. So in the next couple of sessions, we're going to expound on this and what this looks like in your classroom, right? We're going to talk with Ashley, and she's going to give us some of the science behind why some of these things are important, and then we'll go from there. All right, thank you so much. If you have any questions, please write them on that question sheet, because we are going to have a question and answer time later. We've jammed as much as we can into these sessions, so we don't necessarily have time for questions during the session, but we want to answer your questions. So if you have questions, write them down. We kind of gave them to you in a form that you could write it down so it can be anonymous, because we don't want you to feel judged for the question that you might have. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes some of these questions can be sensitive, and so don't feel like you have to put your name on it. Just write the question down, and it will also help us as we prepare for next year. If we see a lot of questions that are similar, we'll know that we can maybe make that a point of session next time. So thank you so much. You all listened. So you were such a joy to talk to. Wow. Thank you so much.